Jim Douglas. I'm the CEO of the leading mobile observability company called Instabug. This is not going to be a product pitch, I promise you. Just give you some thoughts of where we see the market going in terms of adoption of AI and specifically an agentic approach to observability in the future. So all the talk will be centered around that. Any questions during the talk, feel free to interrupt. I'm game if you want to raise your hand. You can talk into the mic or I'll repeat your question if you want. If you can't hear too, please holler. Okay, the starting point. I've got two children and they literally think the world began in 2007 with the first smartphone. And I've tried to educate them. That wasn't even when the first smartphone came out. I'm like old enough to remember Nokia had this really cool smartphone in 1996. It was called the Communicator. And it was built about like that, had a clamshell, had a full QWERTY keyboard, had web apps on it that they built, and actually widgets you could download. So way ahead of that. Even BlackBerry in the early 2000s had a platform that had a bunch of web apps, and they had a nascent, not a marketplace, but they had a bunch of third-party developers that actually could sell you apps that you could download on the platform. So the world didn't actually begin, getting feedback there, I'll go over here. World didn't actually begin when the iPhone came out, and even the iPhone when it came out, if you remember, was a closed environment. You know, all web apps that you had to write in JavaScript, HTML, CSS. So it really wasn't the groundbreaking kind of event that really took the lid off the whole mobile app revolution. This is droidcon, so obviously the kind of thing that broke the ice was Android, and specifically three things. First was at the end of 2007, the advent of the first Android SDK. So back then, the SDK would allow you to write web apps in Java to a really small virtual machine called Delvik. It was pretty cool at the time, really advanced. But the next two big pieces were marketplace and third-party phones. Early 2008, a company called HTC, which was a Taiwanese contract manufacturer, brought out a new phone called the Dream. It was the first third-party Android handset. And simultaneously, they opened what they called Google Market at the time. And that's really what changed the world for all of us, right? The whole notion that you could write native apps, not only in an open source operating system, but you're going to have a marketplace to distribute apps through. And obviously, you're going to have fertile ground in terms of different target devices that you could actually build to. It obviously pushed Apple to do the same thing. Later that year, their SDK came out. They had to open up Objective-C to the rest of the world and open their marketplace to compete. But by that time, Android was taking off like a rocket ship. And that really, as I said, set the stage for what was to come in our domain. Kind of the next phase, and we've been living through this for the last few years, in the web world, we saw a huge sea change with the whole advent of DevOps and then cloud native in terms of an approach to develop code itself. That didn't take hold, obviously, in our domain for a while in mobile, but we've seen in the last few years where folks are really adapting a lot of the same processes that they did before for their cloud native apps, building platform teams, using solid DevOps approaches. Obviously, differences since the whole approach that you take to actually launch code in the wild is different, having to go through stores, but a lot of the fundamentals of how they're doing CI/CD in that domain are now being adopted rapidly. It's actually kind of shocking when you go out. You'd think all companies are there, but as a seller, when you're out there, you find a lot of companies are just starting down this process and are pretty nascent and going through that. What I'm going to talk about today, though, is the next sea change. How not only can you use AI, but specifically use an agentic approach, not only for development, but for being able to observe, remediate issues once you have apps in the wild. Where we are today, where we're going, what impact that's going to have on people in the development community. So the whole talk will be centered around that. Okay, why is this going to be a paradigm shift to start? It's not that long ago where serious coders would say, serious coders live in a command line. People brag about their favorite command line, VI, Emacs, things like that. Today, everybody's got 2 or 3 IDEs that are providing them some code assistance, enable them to launch tools that are in their tool chain. And then rapidly, we're seeing people adopt generative AI to actually help in the coding process. So things have changed fairly dramatically on that front already. But the next big step is when we really start to look at the next level of productivity associated with agents coming into that fold, where we can go from things that are assisting in our process to having tools at our disposal that we can give guidance to and we can task to actually go out and do work for us, either fully autonomously or potentially things that are going to be guided. And we'll talk more about that later as well. I think the next sea change we're going to see, and the agents are really going to make this happen, is you think about software since the beginning, right? We build, we pray, and then we monitor, and we fix when something breaks. We're going to have a great ability not only to deal better with the known knowns, the known unknowns, but with agents, we can also start dealing with the unknown unknowns, things that we couldn't anticipate in our regression suites, we couldn't anticipate in the environment that apps are running in, where agents are either going to be able to quickly find these things on their own for us and then provide insights back to us that we can take actions on or automatically remediate them. Even better, the next phase is going to be where they're predictive. We're talking to a lot of customers about that today. How can you use data they have to really model what potential things could occur in the wild and predict when those things will happen? We've seen things like this in other domains like IoT, where people have done things like predictive maintenance based on kind of cycles of how things run. A little bit more difficult in terms of mobile app world, but same kind of principle where, once again, you model what are some of the kind of known unknowns, and then you have things anticipate how to deal with the unknown unknowns and take remediated steps really quick. The last thing associated with that is just the general thought of how we flip the script in terms of where we spend our time as developers. Today, the majority of the time is not in writing code, it's maintaining code, right? And that's by far not the best investment of time in terms of adding value to customers, ideally. And it's also not the most, fulfilling thing for a coder, right? So 30 to 40% of your time could be building something, and 60 to 70% of your time to maintain it. We need to flip that on its head and spend more of our time actually imagining what to build, and then using things like Agentic AI to really help us on the maintenance of those and really change how we go about prosecuting our job as developers on a go-forward basis. Oh, of course, it's going to stick on me. There we go. So what's making this come to fruition today? Kind of four big things. The first is the obvious one, generative AI. We've seen folks embrace at a rapid pace new tools that are coming out, new models that are coming out. If you look at kind of that progression, started slow, a lot of criticism. These things can only do very simple tasks, but shortly people figured out, hey, doing repetitive tasks is good, and these models all learn quickly to the point now where people are using them effectively for more complex tasks. Obviously, they've got a long way to go, but folks that have been patient and are working and building in terms of what they can do with these models are getting great returns. So that's number one, that's the obvious thing. The second thing, though, is the advent of agents. A lot of the model providers are now providing agents. Copilot's got its own agent now, but there's a whole new domain of third-party agents popping up. So things like Devin that are completely autonomous. Once again, you script what you want to do, you fire and forget until it's done, go back and review the results. And then things like Windsurf, we're using that internally, for example, where it's a much more guided experience where you can give it commands, it'll run a task, it'll stop, you review what it did, it'll run the next task. If you've got to go through and you've got to do an update in terms of how you describe the tasks based on the outcome, you can do that versus relying on full autonomy and then having to go back and start again if it didn't go down a path that you wanted. So there's a bunch of new tools that are coming out. There's some good platforms that are coming out too. Give a shout out to a small company that's a fellow Insight portfolio company called Relevance AI. They've got a platform that lets you build agents very rapidly, and not just for coding. They're doing it for all functions in companies where subject matter experts can themselves very easily code an agent and then put an agent in play, not only for themselves, but the folks that are the best in different practices can put agents in play for other folks that don't have the same level of experience. So this world's going to change very quickly, and it's going to move at a high pace. And so the level of quality in terms of code you can generate, and then once again, how you can put agents in play to actually perform tasks for you, and the next year is going to change at a tremendous pace, which is fantastic. The third thing is really, as I talked about before, was the rise of kind of productivity and proactivity. We're going to be in a position where, once again, we can have capabilities in our hands that are going to allow us to spend a lot more time in thinking about how to actually create value and less time on maintaining it, and have systems in place that are going to allow us to do all those things related to remediation and correcting problems in the field. So we're slowly starting to see agent-based tools come onto the market. Some of them are very narrow, some of them are more broad platforms. All of them nascent today, but as I said, they're going to move really quickly. So if you look at the scope of the things they can attack, fairly narrow in terms of kind of the set of activities that they can address. But once again, as you teach them, And as they learn on their own, this is going to grow pretty rapidly as well. So part of it is having the right expectations about what these technologies can do for you today, and then think about how as they grow, you can leverage them more. The last thing is just our domain is taking off. A big reason why I'm at this company is, I look at compute in general and where center of compute is in people's life. And it clearly is in mobile today. Like if you look at anybody under 40, their mobile phone is not only the center of their life, but it's the command center of everything they do from a business or a personal perspective. And if you look at kind of mainstream companies, so enterprise companies, where the early adopters to mobile apps were all the folks that were trying to monetize directly through gaming and through social and things like that. Every enterprise company is now trying to shift their point of engagement to a mobile application. So it took banks a decade to think about moving people from talking to a teller to talking to a web browser. They're moving as fast as they can to make their primary point of engagement and intimacy be a mobile app. So the world's our oyster in terms of how fast kind of the TAM for apps is going to explode. There's roughly 9 million applications out there today. Like 95% of them are free. The ones that are being monetized are predominantly through advertising, but a lot of that shift is going to be away from there, as I said, in an enterprise domain where it's more about engagement. So when people are thinking about quality of apps that they build and what are the KPIs associated with apps, they're going to start to lean in that direction versus, hey, I'm trying to sell advertising. I got to give people a great onboarding experience, try to keep them on the app long enough to serve up ads, to, hey, I want an environment where people can figure out how to perform a task quickly and then get to that task, perform it seamlessly, get off the app. The KPIs can be more about how often you engage the app and how long you're on it. The satisfaction is going to be all about how fast of an experience you have in the app. So you put those things together. We've got all these new technologies that are helping us in the coding process. We're going to evolve that into an agentic approach where now we've got tools that we can program to go do tasks for us in a fully automated, autonomous state and or a guided state. We now have capabilities in tools that are going to come from third parties that'll augment what we're building internally with our own data. And last but not least, we've got this big expansion in terms of TAM that are going to allow us to put this at play at a much more rapid rate. Now, the world, the way it's going to look, right, kind of fall in two domains, pre-production and production. What happens before you put apps in the wild and after? So you think about it, you're going to have a coding portion of that where you're going to have a coding agent, where maybe even a couple coding agents, depending on how many languages you use in an app and different approaches, but you can task them to work along with you in terms of how you create the code. Once you do that, testing agents, I think, is the nirvana for everybody, not only unit testing, but system testing. But equally important, a lot of you folks probably develop apps that end up in regulated industries. Having agents that can actually tie together code with every piece of test, with every piece of documentation. If you've never done this before, this is wildly expensive, but it's wildly necessary if you do anything in areas where you need safety certification or security certification, or you have HIPAA or related kind of problems. This is going to be a huge boost in terms of productivity for developers. And it also is like horrible experience having to do it. You either write all your code and then you've got to go back and you've got to put in all the hooks associated with tying these three elements together between your code and your test and your documentation, or you do it all from the beginning and it seems incredibly painful to get it done. You'll have agents to do that for you that can build that connectivity, generate the reports that you need for certification and things like that, which will be great. And then release management. One of the obvious things in the mobile world is this whole notion of stores. You don't have the same advantages of continuous deployment where you can do a simple progressive release, a blue-green, and then go full frontal in terms of releasing your code because you've got to go through stores. A couple new tools are coming up right now that are automating that process. Candidly, I don't think they're great yet, but that's going to improve quickly too. And I think part of that in collaboration both with Android kind of marketplace and with the Apple marketplace is just getting a better kind of understanding of kind of what that process looks like, trying to streamline it, and then automate it using agents to do it on both sides of the fence. So this is another big area that's going to be low-hanging fruit. Then when we get code in the wild, back to this whole notion of detect, I'm going to have agents that quickly can detect my known knowns, the things that I know to look for out there through monitoring, the known unknowns through observability, and then at some point, as I said, be predictive for the things that we haven't anticipated. and then an agent that actually goes and remediates and can fix that problem, first testing it, then fixing it, and then we go back to the cycle. It'll take us and collaborate directly without your help if you want with the release agent and push the code out in the marketplace. So the potential to automate this whole cycle as much or as little as you want with an agent running next to you that is in guided mode or it's in autonomous mode that you fire and forget. Now, a couple things to think about on a go-forward basis. Yesterday, I spent time, there was a management summit, all engineering managers, and a lot of the conversation was around AI, and I was really excited about it. And I'll tell you, 2/3 of the conversation was the fear factor of AI. What is AI going to do to our jobs? Is AI going to take jobs? Is AI going to kill the ability for new developers to get jobs coming out of college? So I was listening to this like, okay, we can talk all day about the kind of issues associated with the doomsday scenario around AI, or we could spend some time talking about what are the areas that we would love to automate using AI that can really radically change our productivity. So I led one of the roundtables, forced everybody to get in happy mode, talk opportunistically about what we could do with AI. A couple of things I told them was, hey, look, the way to think about it as a developer, the more time you can spend ideating, thinking about architecture, misuse of this word, but orchestrating, kind of in a proper word where you can actually orchestrate agents to do tasks for you, that's where you should spend your time. Yeah, if you want to code, you can code, because a lot of people love to do that, but you should have the option of not always having to do that. You should have tools that can actually do it for you. And obviously, as I said, they'll develop more over time. You think about it like a new employee, right? If you've got a brand new coder, you're not going to give them full degrees of freedom. You're going to look over the shoulder. You're going to look at their code before they, submit any PR. But over time, you're going to trust them more. Using agents is going to be the same way. The other thing we talked about was, does that mean a developer's job just shifts to looking at the output of agents? Because that would suck too. Like, I don't like doing that, doing code reviews, and I know it's an essential part of the workflow today, but I don't want my whole job to be code reviews. Once again, go back to what I said. These things will improve quickly. Where you should be getting is improving them at a speed such that you don't have to do that, just like a new coder, where you get to a point where you trust them, they submit PRs. Occasionally they're going to be fallible, and you go back and you do correction, just like agents, but your whole life is not going to be there. The kind of analogy I used was thinking about test automation. No one ever wants to take a break and write automation for tests, but once you do it, it's so valuable, right? Because you got that out of the way. But it's always hard to figure out when to make time to do it, because it stinks and it never feels like it's got high rate of return until you actually get it done. This will be the same thing. Your life will not be sitting and looking at the output of agents and trying to remediate issues. It's going to be all about training them to do better, such that you can put them in play for more complex things as you go forward. Once we get that done, then we're on to the next steps of how actually we start to rely on these things once we get code in the wild, and how we do a good job of creating all those known scenarios for our agents, so we don't have to worry about taking remediation steps. They can do that automatically with no input from us. The known unknowns, script as much as we know, probably have person in the middle on those, because in some cases you'll run into things that aren't really a problem and you want to be able to interact, but you want something that's going to find them quick and potentially remediate them quick. And as I said, those predictive models that can really help you. And that's really the flow we want to get into. But everybody's got to open their kind of ears, eyes, hearts, and think about these things. Best way I can characterize it, I've been around long enough where the one thing that I've seen that is a constant is abstraction is the key to advances in software development. When you go back, today it seems silly thinking about a compiler, but the original public commercial compiler was a huge deal. Like, you didn't have to write assembly code anymore. You had a compiler that could generate that for you. That changed the world of programming. And since then, we've had about 8 of those instances where we just increased that level of abstraction. And so complexity went down. Think of AI like that. It's an abstraction layer. Now, it's an oversimplification, I know, but it's also true when you look at the basics of it. It's going to give you an abstraction layer where you can think about code at a higher level. You still got to dip down just like we did with every other abstraction layer, because the tools won't be perfect to start. But over time, we'll trust and we'll learn how to write at a higher level, and we'll learn how to be more productive at a higher level. The nirvana is where we get to the point where we've got zero maintenance apps. Once again, we're spending all our time on ideation, our time on architecture, and orchestrating all these tools to work for us. That's going to be the ideal phase. At the start of that is this whole controlled loop where we're automatically defining and fixing problems. The second piece is going to be really cool. I talked about agent. Think about agentic approach. One of the things that excites me is where you find a problem and you have multiple agents try to solve it. There's not always one way to solve a problem. So I can actually have 3 agents spun up that are looking at the same data set and looking at different ways to solve a problem based on the instructions I gave them and come up with the optimal outcome, not an outcome. And ultimately come up with outcomes that are going to be tailored for certain demographics of your user base. Probably pretty hard and probably a stretch to say you could individualize it, but you probably could optimize around different demographics. Once again, if you have multiple agents attacking the same problem, think about it like having different engineers on your team. Like I said, different level of abstraction, just using automation to do the same thing. The third thing is just getting rid of the wrangling relative to the SDK. That should all just happen automatically. Everything should be updated for you. It should be in good shape. And then at the end, you spend your time, like I said, on the things that make sense. So that's a nirvana scenario. It's really not that far away. Like I'm not going to give the pitch, but there's elements in our product line, other people's product lines that can do a lot of this today. The challenge, once again, is kind of the effectiveness, the I won't even try to say that word. I'm going to blow it again. We'll keep with effectiveness, but the effectiveness on the cases they can actually attack. And that's going to get bigger quickly, fairly narrow right now. But as you get more cycles going through the agents, they learn, and that set of things that they can actually attack will grow at an exponential rate, which is exciting. A couple of things to think about in terms of adoption. Yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about this too. Part of the discussion was, is this a bottoms-up process or a tops-down process? I've got a pretty definitive kind of mindset on this, and it's got a couple components. One, I see a lot of larger companies just trying to generate experiments. They've got people experimenting everywhere in the company. You hear this term, 1,000 flowers. Plant 1,000 flowers and something great will grow. I don't agree with it. You got people running around doing things that absolutely aren't aligned with what your highest priorities are for your business and for your customers. So one of the things we did internally is we said, okay, where are our biggest challenges that are having a direct impact on customer success? Let's narrow those down. And then we created small teams where we had a champion. Those champions then had to do 2 things. They had to kind of bin out those challenges and pick which ones were the highest priorities, and then go do fundamental research on what technologies, so what models, what agents that we use most effectively to do that. We did it not only in engineering, front end, back end, through our whole test process. We did it in our technical support group, we did it in our CS group, we did it in marketing, we did it in sales, we did it in HR. So I did it across the company. A couple things happened. People got excited quick because they felt like they were involved in decision making. We made them accountable for the outcomes, both identifying how to measure outcomes, so measure where we are today, measure progress as we go forward, and then the selection of technology, like who doesn't love that? Now, one of the guidance I gave folks yesterday, and one of the things we're doing is, as you know, technology is moving so fast. It just feels like if you pick a model today and an agent, you can make a mistake in 2 weeks from now, like you're gonna have buyer's remorse. All these technologies are moving quick. They're all gonna improve quickly. You're not gonna make a mistake that quickly, but you've gotta have a constant flow of being out there more than we ever did and looking at new technology and looking at how it's evolving. Always churning kind of your tool set is gonna kill you as well. We've all been through that cycle. So it's more about just tracking what's going on and then picking the logical points where you can actually make those moves and start to move these technologies in. We make great progress doing that, as I said, across the company. Great adoption rates. One of the best things I heard going back to that company I talked about before at Relevance AI, he said every leader in his team, we tell them they have to actually go build an agent because they're a subject matter expert. You have to build an agent to work for you. Then your next task is you've got to boot that agent to work with somebody on your team that doesn't have the same experience. And we're going through the same process and it's working really well. One of the other things to think about, I hear a lot, well, hey, this is great with small companies, it's easy, but it's a lot harder with bigger companies. The absolute opposite is true. If you think about bigger companies, they've got bigger processes,
They document everything. And that's the key to training, right? If you've got everything documented how to do a role, you're like a step ahead, and you actually can move pretty quickly in actually defining agents you want, training these agents, and putting these agents in play. Once you get the base in play, the next is actually getting those into your flow. Start adding those into your pipelines where they're part of your automation suite, back to what we talked about before, the adoption of CI/CD, how you put the agents in that flow. And then once you actually have code out, next step is incrementally get agents out and get them working, once again, in that debug loop, identifying issues. Think about how much autonomy you want to give them in remediation, but get them in place so they're learning very quickly. And then you're at a point where you're changing the game in terms of what your velocity can be as a development organization. So a couple things to think about there. I'm going to back up for a minute. One thing I forgot I want to talk to. The architecture tomorrow, what it's going to look like is you've got this agent that's going to find issues. You got an agent that's going to fix issues. You got an agent that's going to test them. And you got an agent that's going to re-release that code in the wild. One thing to think about is no one is going to adopt technology like this immediately in a full autonomous mode. It is not going to happen. It never happens. I heard a talk the other day, and the guy was talking about an autonomy slider bar. I love that analogy because with most technologies, you can automate anything. It's back to, once again, the quality of the output, but you can also put people in the middle in all those processes. And so the way we think about it, and I think a lot of companies should be thinking about it, is think about that closed loop system, but think about how you put people in there so you can have guided kind of approach to actually adopting till you get to the point, once again, where it can cover more of their user base and their kind of use cases and confidence. They've got confidence in the output and confidence in putting these things in play. So I think from a philosophical standpoint, what you'll see from most of the folks that are building platforms for you, it's we can automate anything. It's not going to cover all your use cases, but we're also going to give you the ability to put people in the middle where you can guide things. I think that's going to be really important. All right, let's flip forward. We're already seeing a lot of this in the Android world. Some of the tools that we talked about are already available. So each of the cases we talked about, coding assistance, test assistance, there's some remedial tools that are trying to do some agentic work in monitoring and observability today. As I said, fairly nascent, but moving very quickly. So, watch this space, not only Android, but in other domains you work in as app developers. You're going to see great progress. The thing I'd say in summary, when you think about it though, is like open mind. The technology is getting there quickly. It's figuring out how in your organizations you can best adopt it. As I said, the things that worked well for us is, set the parameters that you want your dev teams to look at. So they're not just taking time to experiment in areas that aren't aligned with customer value or business value. So give them some parameters, give them accountability where not only are they engaged, they get to make decisions, but you hold them accountable for the outcome, including how you measure progress, and let them get in to make decisions on technology. What you're going to see is the adoption rate is going to improve at a dramatic rate quickly. Once you do that, this whole notion, as I talked about, is subject matter experts really leading the way in terms of defining agents that can actually help, they want to build internally and adopt, making them actually build, train agents, and then push those agents out into the rest of your workforce. The other thing I'd say is don't just think about the whole engineering cycle, think about the things that impact your life too. One of the areas that, for example, we found, and you find this in every company, right? Engineers bitching about the technical support engineering team. They're not triaging enough of the incoming problems, right? All the load goes on us. As you dig into it, it's never a one-sided thing. But this is one of the things that we looked at where we could actually use agents that could work together between our release management team and between our TSEs on the other side. It's pretty nascent once again, but now we have agents collaborating in that process of how we go through and we triage problems in our code set. Everybody's happier, that's the biggest thing, but the more important thing is the speed in which we can actually address problems for our customers has gone up rapidly, and our expectations are that it's going to go up on an exponential basis on a go-forward level just because of how much more they can do, not only using large language models, but once again, the agents we're deploying in their domain and how those agents are trying to collaborate with the folks in engineering. Like I said, early work, early returns look good. We're very bullish about it and optimistic. So think through that within your organizations. and then start looking and playing with new capabilities. As I said, we're doing a lot of cool things. A lot of the other vendors here are as well. Get out, get demos today, look at what folks are doing in this domain, but bring them in-house. Do proof of concepts. Obviously, there's cost associated with that, but there's a big return with it as well. So now is the time to start looking. Starts with kind of, as engineering managers, top down, incentivizing people and encouraging them to do it. In my case, CEO down, whole company starting to look different about how we prosecute our jobs and really taking advantage of the sea change. So exciting times now, exciting times ahead. Now's the time to dive in. As I said, the future is our oyster. We've got this huge TAM expanding in front of us, just giving how central mobile apps are to everybody's life and every walk, every aspect of their life. Great new technology in terms of large language models, but the big breakthrough, as I said, is going to be single agent and multi-agentic approaches to how we prosecute the totality of our job in building code. All right, thank you very much today. Instabug, check us out, please. That's the only gratuitous plug. Go to our website if you would. And if you have any questions, we're right over here. You can ask them, track me down, or if anybody has questions now, happy to answer. All right, excellent. Hope the rest of the show goes great. Thank you. Cheers.